Good morning, everyone. My name's Andrew Stolfi. Use he, him pronouns, and I'm so glad to just say hi and welcome everyone to the meeting today. I'm the DCBS director, and you didn't come here to hear me talk, so I'm going to be very, very brief and just welcome you. One, start by thanking Business Oregon so much for partnering with us to have this space today, to have this meeting, to have this joint meeting and presentation. It's so important to have this time and opportunity to hear and to learn and to have a discussion. And we're so happy to partner with a sister agency in order to have this. And so we're here today as part of our celebration of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month under a theme of being inclusive. I've got the honor of helping to introduce our presenter today. Today, we're very happy to have with us Dr. Linda Tamura, who's a professor emerita of education at Willamette University. She's a Sansei, which is a third-generation Japanese American and daughter of a World War II veteran. An orchard kid raised on a fruit farm in Hood River, Linda is also the granddaughter of Japanese immigrants. In addition to Nisei Soldiers Break Their Silence, Coming Home to Hood River, Linda is the author of the Hood River Issei. Linda is also the co-editor-in-chief of the Oregon Encyclopedia. She chaired the 2021 Oregon dedication of the Go for Broke stamp honoring Japanese American World War II veterans on Flag Day. As a proponent of Senate Bill 1509A, which was signed by our governor on March 7th, Linda has been a collaborator for dedicating Oregon Highway 35 as the Oregon Nisei Veterans World War II Memorial Highway. So with that, I'd be happy to turn things over. And again, just want to thank all of you for being here today to listen, to learn, to contribute to the discussion. And with that, Linda, I believe I'm handing it over to you or maybe one of my colleagues. Okay, Jennifer. Yep.
Yes, hey, thank you, Andrew. So good morning, everybody. Thank you, each and every one of you, for being here with us today to recognize and celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We are very pleased to be able to welcome those of you now returning to the office and those of us joining remotely. And a really special thank you to DCBS and Business Oregon leadership for your support in coordinating and allowing the space to honor the differences and learn more. This presentation might discuss some historical events that might be distressing to some people. If you'd like to give feedback, please contact Veronica Marie or Mary Pence and let us know how it went for you. Can you change the slide, please? Thank you. So please take a moment now to review the ground rules, but please keep in mind that we're also recording this presentation for future use. And we're also here today to honor the incredibly rich heritage and contributions of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in our communities, and especially those who are working among us here at the state of Oregon. Please save your questions until the end. And then you can either ask them directly or you can submit them in the chat, and us as panelists will keep them till the end to ask Linda. Now, please, everybody, join me in welcoming Ms. Dr. Linda Tamura. Thank you again for your time, and take it away.
Thanks so much. I'm thrilled to be here. I love your collaboration. I love the way that you've organized this and the way that you're structuring your follow-up. So thank you for that. And thank you for the sunshine that you brought today. I think it really is spring. Happy May. Thank you for inviting me to join you on these important conversations. I'll have to say that as an educator for 42 years, I actually learned a lot I studied, I learned, and I presented. One of the things that happens though, with invitations, especially like yours, that's been really invigorating for me, because you're really causing me to do a lot more reflection about my own life. In some ways, I feel like I'm a big kid again, growing and learning, and most of all, reflecting on my past. I'd like to share with you now a favorite poster. And I'll tell you that I remember buying it at the bookstore right away when I saw it, when I was an undergraduate student in college. When I taught second grade, I shared it with my students and kept it up in the classroom. And when I went to university and became a grad student, and also taught at Pacific and also at Willamette University, I shared it with students, and I also posted it in my office. So I'll share it with you now. I like you. You're different. And when I purchased it, I don't know exactly what it was that was so compelling to me, but it was important enough underneath and in my soul that I kept it. And now, as you ask your questions, and as I continue my journey in life, I think I'm beginning to understand more about what was so important about being different and being the same, and how we're all unique, and how it's important that we energize and invite and revitalize being individuals. I will share with you a couple zingers when I was growing up, and they didn't mean a lot then. But as I'm older, I go back and think about them, especially with your questions. One was when I was a kid, probably 4 or 5, we lived in Hood River, and about once a month, Mom and Dad and my sister and I drove to Portland and went shopping and visited friends. Typically, we stopped at the Myron Frank department store. And I remember one day walking among the clothes racks and hearing some giggling. And I thought, well, what was that? So I moved to get closer, and I realized that the gigglers were a young girl and a young boy. I peeked out, and immediately they were regaling in laughter and giggling. And it occurred to me, they're not laughing at a joke, they're laughing at me. And it was such a strange feeling. I felt a little bit like, what is wrong with me? Why is that so funny? A second experience happened in second grade. My teacher had each student come up to the front of the room, turn our backs to the class, and we looked at the colors in their hair. And my classmates were brunettes and blondes. And we oohed and awed about the colors in their hair. When I walked up, I remember the teacher said, look at all the colors in Linda's hair. You can see black and red and green and blue. And everyone went, ooh. But I remember thinking, wait a minute, I just want to be like everybody else. Why do I feel like such an oddity? And maybe that's one reason why throughout my life, as a teacher especially, my goal has been to help others feel excluded and not feel different. And that wondering and that continuous teaching, and especially the learning, have been significant in my life. I do remember when I graduated from college and was a new teacher in a small community then that is now pivotal to wine country. Immediately after I told my grandparents where I would be teaching, Grandpa went to a directory of Japanese Americans in Oregon to find out if there who might live in the area that he could contact. And he came back and he said, my goodness, there are no Japanese living in McMinnville. In fact, that was not surprising, because once I moved there, I was not only the only Japanese American teacher in the district, but also the only Japanese American resident in the community. And I had heard stories that it was a WASP community, white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, that the Chinese restaurant north of town was actually outside the city limits, and the owners of the restaurant weren't able to reside within the city. Let's move on. So I loved teaching. I had, I think, 22 students my first year of 4 years teaching there. They were a diverse group. They were adventurous, quiet, curious, loud. They ranged in socioeconomic level. About a third of them were Hispanic, Latino. Some of them didn't speak English, but I loved teaching my students, and I even keep in touch with some of them today. There was an aha moment though. My first year of teaching, I decided that I wanted to have as many home visits with parents as possible to encourage that dialogue early in the year. And when I visited the Rodriguez home in Dayton, Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez told me, well, our son and daughter had a fight about you. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, what happened? And they told me, well, Karen thought that you were from Texas, and Rudy said, no, I think she's from India. And it was at that moment that I realized, my gosh, I had been so concerned about my students and finding out about them and asking them to share, that I totally forgot that in fact, I was unique to them. I may have been the first Japanese American they saw. They didn't know anything about my background. And in some ways, I was an oddity to them. So I learned as much from my students my first year as they might have from me. I was a pretty quiet kid growing up, although I became very precocious. I knew I was Japanese American when my grandparents came back from a visit to Japan. They brought me a kimono, and I wore it during the Hood River 4th of July parade on the float. We also learned Japanese dancing, and we performed for our grandparents. And so that heritage was a little bit evident to me. My grandparents, Grandpa and Grandma Noji in Parkdale, spoke Japanese. I understood a little bit of it. I spoke English to them, and they understood a little bit of mine, but we all got along. At Thanksgiving, when our relatives got together, we enjoyed turkey and stuffing and sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, chow mein, and sushi. Didn't everybody? My mom tells me that after the first day of first grade, I came home and bemoaned to her, there's nobody at school for me to marry. And my mom and dad said, well, what do you mean? Well, apparently I was the only Japanese American in my class. In fact, the only Japanese American in my school until my sister joined me 2 years later. And I guess I thought that I needed to marry someone who looked like my dad. And apparently I was on the hunt from first grade to find a husband. My first grade teacher, Mrs. McElhose, read Linda's Indian Home. It was about the YM Indians at Celilo Falls. And so after that, my classmates thought I was Native American. Later in grade school, I distinctly remember reading Robert Louis Stevenson's Foreign Children, Little Indian, Sioux or Crow, Little Frosty Eskimo, Little Turk or Japanese. Oh, don't you wish that you were me? It went on to say, you have curious things to eat. I am fed on proper meat. And what a distracting way to imagine what my life was like. But I do remember that school lunches were always full of surprises for me. In fact, that probably was what the first thing I told my mom and dad when I got home, what I'd had for school lunch. I was introduced to cornbread. I was introduced to cornbread, pizza, hominy, tacos, and my very first rice pudding. It had raisins and nuts, and it was sweet. And the cook made me stay in during noon hour because I just couldn't fathom eating it, because I'd never had rice that was sweet like that. No one in my textbooks looked like me either. They were all blonde or brunette. In high school, when we studied Pacific Northwest history, we never studied about the Issei, the first generation, my grandparents who immigrated to this country. And even in college, Western Civ was required. Eastern civilization was an elective. So I didn't take it. But there was a time in fourth grade when I went to summer camp, and I didn't have a suitcase. So mom told me, you can take the duffel bag that I took when I went to when I went to camp. And I always thought mom and I must have had the same common experiences. Move ahead, there it is. So that's the duffel bag that mom took. It wasn't until many years later that I realized that it had numbers on it. But I imagine that we shared singing at the campfire late at night, rowing on the lake, eating in the mess hall, sleeping on bunk beds, and only 2 of those were accurate. When I was a young adult, however, my uncle, in fact, I was teaching at Pacific University, so I was in my mid-20s. My uncle suggested to me that I interview my grandmother. She's led a really interesting life, he told me. She was a picture bride, so it'd be great to learn a little bit more about what she experienced. I interviewed my grandmother one time with my mom as a translator, and it was fascinating. She came to the United States in 2016 as an 18-year-old picture bride to marry my grandfather. When she came, she was surprised. She had lived in a home that was fairly affluent, and to take a buggy ride down a wooded dirt road and to find that she would be living in what she called a rabbit house. It was the smallest house she'd ever seen. The tables and chairs were high, and she was afraid she'd fall out of bed because she'd always slept on futon. And the bathrooms were outside. Grandma told me there was nothing I liked about living in America. My grandfather had come to the United States in the late 1890s, and like many of the Issei young men, he thought he'd come for 3 to 5 years, earn a lot of money, and then go back to Japan and make his living. In fact, life was much harder and the wages were much lower. He worked on the railroad and eventually came to Hood River, where he helped to clear land. And then before the war, accumulated 120 acres of fruit trees. Let's see, let's go to the next one. There was an issue, though, as I was collecting information about my grandparents, because there were no books about Japanese immigrants, and there was very little information in my history books or any other resources that were available. I went to the History Museum, and they had a 2.5-page handout on Japanese in Hood River, and it stopped in 1940. So I went to the library and spent hours and then days in the basement going through old yellowed copies of the newspapers, the Hood River News and other local newspapers. And this was the page, a full-page ad that turned my stomach. And I still can't look at it without my stomach churning. The message was clear. My grandparents and my parents were not welcome in their hometown. On the right, you see a map, and that was an excerpt of a map in Parkdale, Oregon. The goal was to show that Japanese farms were squeezing out white farmers. In fact, one of the large plots you see belonged to my grandfather. What you don't see on the far right was a list of Japanese farmers. And the goal was to show that list in the newspaper each week and to place a check mark by those that had been sold to white farmers. But the worst part for me was the list of names underneath. There were names of people who purportedly signed a petition saying Japs are not wanted in Hood River. All told, there were 6 petitions in the newspaper over 2 or 3 months, and a total of more than 1,800 names. When I went through that list, I found the names of parents and grandparents of my classmates and friends, my school bus driver, and my junior high English teacher. I was distraught. But what I began to realize that there was a veil of secrecy in my hometown. This was a community secret about the past. When I asked my mom and said, well, I'd like to learn more about it. And her response was, do you want to begin World War III? And that's when I learned a Japanese saying, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. In other words, when Japanese Americans returned from the war, they simply wanted to get along because they had property. Their livelihood had been in the trees and in their orchards. And so they simply put their noses to the grindstone and worked. People didn't ask questions. They simply worked side by side and focused on their own livelihood. Okay, what I learned was that on May 13, in just a few days, 9 days, 1942, 431 of Japanese descent from my hometown were forced to leave from the train depot in Hood River. They were observed by armed guards, and this was a result of Executive Order 9066. There were no trials, there were no hearings, they had no rights, even though 2/3 of them were American citizens. They were incarcerated in temporary centers in Northern California, and then eventually to permanent American concentration camps in California, and then in Idaho. Uh, 6 days after Pearl Harbor was bombed, my dad volunteered to serve in the United States military. That was no question for me. He told me, I'm an American citizen. It was my duty to serve our country. And here he is on the far right, visiting the Tamura family when they were incarcerated at Minidoka in Idaho. As I studied what happened during World War II, there was one incident that came as quite a surprise. Here's the county courthouse in Hood River, and along the top, you'll see, you maybe can see a list of names, and there were 1,600 names of young men and women who served in the military for World War I and World War II from the Valley. On November 29, 1944, the names of 16 were blotted out, and they were all Japanese Americans. That brought national notoriety to my hometown with editorials from the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, Collier's, the San Francisco Chronicle. There were more than 400 letters sent to Hood River from GIs across the ocean. Only one of them supported that act. And there were letters from citizens across the country chastising what happened, including one that I found interesting: "I'll never buy a Hood River apple again." So learning these untold stories helped me to understand the honor, the sacrifice, the perseverance, the loyalty, the courage, what my family and the Japanese American community had withstood. Now I understood the silence in the community. They simply needed to survive. They simply wanted to get along. They looked different. They felt different, but they wanted to be. And examining those stories through oral histories, through looking at documents, through working with others, I'm extremely proud now of my family's heritage. So what does that mean for me? Well, these are actually reminders for myself, but I'll share them with you as well. Number one, value differences and appreciate similarities. I think because underneath, I was a little bit aware of how my family felt and perhaps how Japanese Americans felt. They wanted to belong. We wanted to be accepted for who we are. We didn't want to be that different. We wanted to be part of the group. And that meant that when I taught, I think I put a special premium on helping students to feel positive about themselves, to feel accepted, to focus on self-concept. And that meant focusing on those questions that they brought. And I needed to focus too on the questions they had about me. Here's a replica that I made of the poster that I showed you at the beginning. That was my goal, to help my students, who also would become teachers, to be accepting of themselves, but also to be accepting of others. And sometimes that meant challenges. For example, after the first day of class, I had a young man who met with me in my office and said, "I've decided to come out, and I decided I'm going to do it in your class." And we talked about what would make him feel most comfortable and what I could do and how that might happen. And then afterward, I panicked. I went to the counselors and other colleagues and said, "What can I do to make this safe?" It all worked out. But these opportunities made it possible for me to grow as well. Sometimes there was divisiveness among the students or among the colleagues. Again, going back to, we're different, we're unique, but we need to figure out ways to get along. I just found a quote that I'd say for many, many years from John Kerry. And it said, "Raise your hand if you have Native American blood in you. Everybody else is an immigrant." And sometimes we just need to remember. There's a book called Everybody Cooks Rice. We all eat rice in different ways, and we might add different condiments, different spices. And it's a story of a little girl who goes to different people's houses, and she realizes that the Pakistanis eat rice in a different way, Chinese eat it a different way. But in some ways, this brings us all together. We're all the same, and we're all different. Number two, consider what you bring to the class, to the workplace, something that I forgot myself. And Karen and Rudy taught me the important lesson of the cultural baggage that we bring. I needed to think about the values that I brought, the assumptions that I had, the biases that I might have, and my expectations for them and for myself, that cultural baggage. I think it's okay to admit assumptions or confusions or discomfort. It's okay to ask questions about what we don't know and what would make other people feel comfortable. I know that some of you have read the article that I wrote many, many years ago in 1996, No Longer Strangers. I had been bemoaning to my colleague, Jim Garcia, that I couldn't find the right article to share with my students. So he challenged me and said, well, why don't you write one yourself? So I did, and it was published. And that was a reflection on me and what I bring to the classroom and what I want to do to challenge myself. Our children must grow up knowing and liking those who look and speak in different ways, or they will grow up as strangers in a hostile land. Vivian Paley from White Teacher. We do need to be open to new ideas and to examine all sides of an issue. I remember when I ate tofu and sushi, and it seemed a little bit odd at that point. And now you can't go anywhere without seeing a sushi restaurant. So my goal and our goal would be, how can we be invitational to others about who they are and what they bring? Number 3, actively engage others. I mentioned that I was a pretty quiet, shy kid, at least in the classroom. I didn't feel comfortable. I became quite an expert at the head dodge because the teachers seemed to want to ask questions that required the correct answer, not a thought-provoking question. And I simply didn't feel safe answering questions. So one of my goals in the class and in the workplace and in meetings is to invite safe participation. And that's what I call active participation. So for example, in the classroom, I might ask a general question about a thought. It didn't have a right answer. It was a thoughtful question. And I'd ask my students to think about it to themselves, or maybe even jot down a note. After about 30 seconds to a minute, now share your thoughts with a partner. And that gives them a chance to articulate what they're thinking, but not in front of everybody. It's a lot safer to do so when you're talking to a partner. And it might help you to expand and elaborate on what you're thinking. Sometimes then I'll ask each pair to share with another pair. And so now we've got a foursome. We've got more feedback, more ideas. And after that, I might ask them to expand to a larger group. I might ask them to randomly select someone to report to the group. They might create a poster or create or act something out or create a dilemma that they can solve, but finding different ways for them to participate in class. I really focused on the inquiry, not telling students, but asking questions. And I tend to do that in meetings as well. I also find that when we get together, for example, for family Thanksgiving dinners, as we're sitting around the table, and I notice that maybe one person hasn't said very much, but I know that person has a lot to contribute. I find myself in that role again, asking them in front of others a safe question that they might contribute, and then we expand our question to include everyone. Inclusivity is important to me. Maybe one more example, when I was teaching at Willamette, most of the schools, I think if not all the schools we worked with, were in Salem. And I realized that while I wasn't familiar with Woodburn, there was a lot I thought we could learn by engaging our students in the Woodburn School District. So I met with the superintendent. I ended up with a partner school, Heritage Elementary School in Woodburn. I met with the principal. I worked with the teachers, and pretty soon we had a partner school. And sometimes I spent several days at Heritage with 5 to 7 student teachers at a time working with those teachers. It's simply finding opportunities and making the best of those who are willing to help us. And finally, number 4, celebrate role models. And this part I really like. In 2013, when the Congressional Gold Medal was given to Japanese American World War II veterans, the Smithsonian had the original gold medal, and it traveled to 10 cities in the United States. One of those was Portland at the Oregon Historical Society. So they invited me to co-curate an exhibit based on my book, which we did, and I focused on questions. After the exhibit began traveling, the first site was Hood River. And while I was excited, I also thought, oh my goodness, it could come off as such a negative story. I want to tell the truth. They need to understand what happened, but is there a way to balance that? And that's how then I created Heroes and Heralded. There were people who, despite the ramifications, did step up and did speak out and did support Japanese Americans, even when they might have suffered repercussions themselves. I identified 18. Unfortunately, none of them were alive, but their ancestors were. And we heralded their achievements. The governor and legislators sent congratulatory letters. The chair of the county commission, local legislators joined us and gave certificates, and we honored 18 descendants. We had grandchildren hanging from the rafters. They said there were more people there than they'd ever had before. But what was important to me was that we were honoring those who had stepped forward, and that was an important model for others. This is the daughter-in-law of a woman who was German, who marched into stores that had no Jap signs on their windows and said, "I'm German. Does that mean that you won't honor my business as well?" The daughter-in-law, Nancy Mahler, became a teacher, and she and a coworker created a curriculum on Japanese Americans. You may know that last June, the United States Postal Service released a forever stamp in honor of Go for Broke Japanese American World War II veterans. We held our celebration at the Oregon Historical Society in June on Flag Day, and former Governor Ted Kulongoski was our honorary chair. This veteran, in fact, just turned 97 last Saturday. But that was important, to honor those who don't get recognition themselves. And this spring, we were able to work with the legislature so that the Oregon Senate and the Oregon House unanimously passed Senate Bill 1509A to dedicate Highway 35 in Hood River as not just the Hood River, but the Oregon Nisei Veterans World War II Memorial Highway. We will have a ceremonial bill signing with Governor Brown on June 1st, and we're planning a dedication, a public dedication on August 13, right next to the train depot where Japanese Americans departed. The final image I want to share with you comes from our exhibit. And at the end, I wanted to have scenarios where people could imagine what would they do and question themselves. And then finally, we had a big panel with blank stars. And I asked people to consider what they had witnessed and the simple question, what would you do? I took a lot of pictures. The panel was full, but this was one of my favorites. Clearly, a young student wrote, respect others. And then someone wrote, Max and his family will step forward. And this meant a lot to me because it meant that Max and his mother and dad likely had a conversation about what had happened and what they could do going forward. And that's important, that we talk about it, that we think about it, that we consider, what can we do to help ourselves? What can we do to help others? So, can we create spaces where coworkers and neighbors are no longer strangers to themselves or to one another? The answer is clear. We must. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time and sharing this information with us. I'm going to pass it over to Cassie to ask some questions for our Q&A. If anyone who's participating has any questions, you can go ahead and send them in the chat, and we'll have Cassie ask those out loud. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Linda, for a wonderful presentation. I think one of the things that stood out to me was this concept that you talked about of untold history, and it I think is exemplified in the work that you've done both in kind of your education career and then also bringing back kind of this information and honoring the lives of Japanese Americans in Hood River. But one of the questions that I have is, how do we engage and interact with untold history that we might not be aware of within our own families, so our ancestors, or also the places that we grew up? So, you know, the history that might be there that we're unaware of.
Yeah, that's a really good question. In fact, at the Peace Tree dedication that we held last Saturday, 2 younger Japanese Americans were talking to me, and they said, well, yeah, our relatives don't talk about it. That's exactly what I found. When the background is tough, there's simply a reluctance to speak about the past. In fact, in the case of Japanese Americans, many scholars have related it to PTSD. It was a syndrome, and they keep it to themselves. They feel that they've done something wrong to bring this onto them. They take ownership for it, and it's just not healthy to keep it out. I'll share an example, and then I'll answer your question. When I began interviewing my grandmother, she wouldn't talk to me for a year because she decided she was just a poor old woman. She had nothing significant to tell. She said, now, if you want to interview someone, go interview Eleanor Roosevelt. Now, there's a woman who's done a lot, and she's got a great story, but I'm just a poor old woman. I have nothing to tell you. The same with the Issei, the first generation. When I spoke with them, they really didn't want to talk because they thought that it might elevate them in the eyes of other people, and they didn't think they were important. What I found was really helpful was find something that you think was important to that person. And it might be a special photograph, it might be a special artifact, and keep a stash of a number of those items, but choose the one that you think might be most meaningful. And then ask grandma or mom and dad or your aunt to tell it, what can you tell me about this? And that might open the doors to sharing stories. And then, of course, you'll want to show them how interested you are. You're going to ask follow-up questions. You're going to show with your nonverbal signals that this is really important. Your body language, you might be sitting down and not standing up. And so you're going to show how earnest you are. Can you tell me more? And maybe that's enough for that day. And then maybe a next day or next week, there are other items. And well, I was thinking about what you said, Grandma, and I've got some other pictures. Is this the person you were talking about? But I think making it safe is important. One other thing I'll say is when I took a sabbatical to ask questions of the Issei generation. And the first thing I did was to take an oral history class from Charlie Morrissey, who had been the oral historian for the Truman Library and was the oral historian at Baylor Medical School. And he taught classes every summer for a period of time at Portland State. I learned so much, but the one thing that was important, he said, the critical part is rapport, rapport, rapport. You got to make it safe for them. And so hopefully maybe one of those might work.
Thank you so much for that response. I think like building that trust with the group of people or even your family members who might not want to open up about the history or the things that they've experienced in their life could be a really good way for us to learn about our untold histories, both in the family or also within the community. Our next question is from Charna, and it is, where can we buy your books? And I'll expand upon that a little bit more, but where can we learn more about the work that you've been doing? Are there exhibits currently that we could go to, or how do we continue to learn more from?
Oh, what a nice question. The book Hood River East, I think maybe Amazon, the Oregon Historical Society, the Japanese American Museum of Oregon online. Those are available. I just finished curating an exhibit called Grace, Grit, and Gaman that was at the Japanese American Museum of Oregon, and it just closed last month. But I thank you. I've done writing with different organizations, including the Oregon Historical Society. One thing I will say, I am one of 3 co-editors in chief of the Oregon Encyclopedia. It's online. We have more than 1,800 entries. They were written by regular people, not just scholars. And they're fact-checked, they're edited by members of our editorial board, and they include a range of topics. We're trying to add more about ethnicities, about groups, people, places, events, organizations, institutions. That's a wonderful place to go to find out about people and places in Oregon that might be questions for you, including Japanese Americans. But it also might be something, because I know you've got a range of talent here, that people here might be interested in saying, hey, there's a topic that's not included. You can nominate a topic and you can nominate yourself as an author. So that's my pitch. Thank you.
Yeah, and I just dropped the link into the chat as well with the Japanese American Museum of Oregon for those who want to learn more and continue kind of their education in this.
Maybe just one other comment. Yeah. There's on May 14, I believe it is, there is going to be an AAPI celebration outside the Japanese American Museum of Oregon. It's in conjunction with the city, and I believe the governor will be there and others, but there will be music and programs and food. So you can check that, and that would be on their website.
Awesome, fabulous. So we had a couple comments that came in around one from Trisha, who says, this is so relatable to me. Thank you for sharing out loud. And then another from Melissa, who says, it's a comment and a question. Thank you for this wonderful talk, Linda. I learned so much. It was enlightening, encouraging, and at times sad. Your stories are powerful. Thank you for sharing your life with us. And her question is, what is Hood River like now? How or when did healing take place in that community?
Thank you. That's really an important question. And I'm excited to share the answers with you. I when I mentioned the traveling exhibit, I've been invited to give talks in Hood River, and people came, which was nice. I think in many ways, writing the book, focusing on both sides of the story and honoring heroes and heralded was important. I think I mentioned that several years later, I was invited to do it again. So we honored more recent heroes and heralded, and the mayor came to join us this time. Through the program, through the ages, we've actually been able to work in tandem. The American Legion Post 22 in 2014 dedicated a brick at the Memorial Park in honor of all Nisei veterans. At Idlewild Cemetery 2 years later, a monument, a marble monument, started out with the names of the 16 that were removed from the county courthouse, but they ended up expanding it, and it includes now the names of all Japanese American veterans, older and younger, and that's important. I mentioned the peace tree dedication that we had last Saturday. 2 ginkgo trees were planted a year ago, and they were germinated from seeds that survived the Hiroshima bomb in 1945, and that was important. But for me, what is really pivotal is the dedication of the highway, and we're really looking forward to that. There were more than 100 testimonies in support of the highway. All of them were positive. There were no negative ones. What was important to me was that citizens around the state, actually out of state, but also within Hood River, supported it. And that included veterans, and that included Post 22 American Legion. We have now created an advisory group of 18 to help us plan for these events. And the commander of Post 22 is one of our participants. And so we're really working hard to bring everybody together, to honor the fact that we can work together. The past is the past, but we can move forward. And maybe for a glimpse at how some of those times have changed, you can go online to the Oregon State Capitol, where it focuses on Senate Bill 1509A, and you can actually read the testimonies that people submitted. But thank you for that question, because it's important to me. This is where I grew up, and I don't want to badmouth, but I do want to be accurate about the history. The past is the past, but what's more important than ever is that we rise above the past, we learn what happened, and we move forward, and we do that together. Thanks.
Thank you. And it looks like Bryant has a question. And Bryant, you're part of the panel, so I don't know if you want to unmute and ask your question. I'm happy to ask it for you. All right, I see you.
I can. First of all, Dr. Tamura, thank you so much for sharing with us this rich history and your life experience. And we know the value of each person's story. But I wanted to kind of touch on something that I think caused all of us heartache and pain over the past year. And that was the witnessing of the horrible atrocities against AAPI community members around our country. And so I wanted to just kind of get your take to see what it is that you feel we can do that can help to demonstrate our support of the healing that needs to take place and continue to build up our AAPI communities around this country, just an acknowledgement of, that the fact that, yes, we are healing in the past, it's the past, but we still have horrible atrocities that are happening in over the past year. We all openly witnessed the things that were happening against this community in our national news.
Thank you. That's so important. I think building Bryant, on what you were doing right here. I was a bit blown away by, first of all, by the invitation. I think you found me when I submitted a test, when I was testifying for the Senate bill, and I received the invitation to come and join you. I was so pleased with the format that you've created, that this is part of who you are and what you want for your coworkers, and that you're following up with a 45-minute discussion session. I think providing the opportunity to honor, you're walking the talk, which is important. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to simply convey that this is important, whether it's posters or conversations or questions. I will say that when I think back on my life as a budding Japanese American, I don't think I've ever really faced outright discrimination. But what I realize is, and maybe getting at your question in a different way, is that there were mentors who, they didn't just say, Linda, we think you should do this, but they gave me opportunities to tell my story, to be visible. They checked in with me. And I'll go back a little bit. When I was so it goes to recognizing that I have worth, that my story is important, that I was part of the group and I wasn't an oddity, and Linda's a valuable person. When I was my first year of teaching, my administrator sent me to a systems analysis class. I had no idea what I was doing there. They were mostly administrators, and I don't even know what the topic was. We got these big, thick notebooks. And I thought, okay, why am I here? But what I realized was that he was guiding me to take other positions, to be upfront. And he was telling the district, she's the only Japanese American here, but here she is, and she's part of your group. When I went to grad school, my major professor said, oh, I nominated you to be a teaching assistant. Oh, okay. I had little knowledge of what that was. My family didn't go to college. And I ended up co-teaching classes, soon teaching classes, visiting schools, making connections with administrators and teachers in the school district. And I got out. Pretty soon they invited me to lunches with faculty, and thought, he didn't just say, Linda, you should be a part of this, but he made it safe for me to do that. When I was teaching at Pacific, the dean, the president, and at Willamette, the same thing, gave me opportunities to be part of the group, to take on leadership roles. And I think that noticing who I was, what I might have to contribute when I didn't know myself what that might have been, was really important. So a long-winded response to your question is, keep doing what you're doing so fabulously. Provide opportunities for conversations, invite people to share their stories, make it explicit that there are ground rules at the beginning and we respect other people. It's not right to put people down. This is the way that we are with each other. So I just appreciate how I think you are, and thank you for that question.
Linda, thank you so much. I think one thing that you just said that touched my heart was, it's important that we provide safe opportunities. And so often, I think maybe that's missed when we invite underrepresented and communities of color to come and to share, to make sure that those opportunities are safe for them, and so that we don't continue to perpetrate and do more harm. And your words just have so much wisdom in it, and the experience that you have and that you're sharing with us today. I'm really kind of hanging on to every word you're dropping. A lot of wisdom here that I feel is so valuable, even as as whether it's AAPI month or just as a human being. And at the end of the day, we are talking about humanity, right? And the stories and the relationships that are there. And so thank you so much for that. Appreciate it.
Just wanted to comment. And one of the things that I realized was these administrators that I mentioned, when I went back and looked at it, I realized they were white men.
Mhm.
And so I thought, wow, you know, that was great. They just didn't call me out. They didn't identify me. They just made the opportunity safe. And I thought that was pretty cool. So yeah, and thanks for your question.
The acknowledgement that representation really does matter, and how that representation is treated is also a testament to those that supported you and recognized your value and saw, like you said, in yourself, something that you hadn't even seen just in you, and materialized that and gave you the space to do that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I see that in your agency, that's what you're doing. You're invitational, you're finding out more about people, you're making opportunities possible for them to engage with each other. Maybe one other thought is, example, when I was teaching at Pacific, we had a class called for mentoring, and it was mentoring Hispanic Latino students at the middle school, and we worked with the principal. So we had, I think, 8 or 10 students, and pairs of students worked with a student who was identified by the principal, and they not only met during school hours, but they also spent time on weekends together. And that was a wonderful way to go beyond. And when we held our celebration at the end of the year, it was amazing because the huge room that we had didn't fill everyone. We had parents and grandparents who came to celebrate. That was wonderful. When I was at Willamette, we worked with Willamette Academy, and these were students who had lots of potential, maybe not the means like I did when I went to college, but they were potential college students and simply needed to get their feet on campus. And we did some liaisons with them as well. We invited the students to advise our future teachers, and that put them in a different role. But we all learned so much. And it seems to me that in your agency, even the collaboration that you have with each other here, but even individual collaborations, whether they're volunteering with agencies or homeless shelters, or having a relationship with Big and Little Sisters program, those kinds of regular connections make the lives of others more real.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we are fortunate to have Veronica, who keeps us on our toes about all the goings on in the community, and telling us about how we can connect with the community as well in our professional roles, which is great. Which is really great. Another question, and I think you sort of touched on this in this last response, was that I had was, what are some ways for us to create more safe spaces that value diversity? And I guess I'll expand upon that a little bit more, but in understanding that safety might look different to so many different people, and how do we kind of create that environment in our workplaces, or also in our personal lives?
So how do we make safe spaces?
Yeah, like if there are ways that in which we can create or make things more safe for people, if it's looking at processes, or if there's tools, or personally in your personal life, if it's just kind of learning more about folks and their backgrounds and how to kind of create that space. And I know that you've done that work in your classrooms, and you've talked a bit about it, but are there like some key takeaways of like, here are some things that you found to really make those, the spaces that we engage with safe?
Sure. Thank you. I'm going to go back to my interviews with the Issei, the first generation Japanese, who didn't want to talk about themselves, spoke a different language, didn't think they had done anything significant, and anyway, in many ways felt shame because the government had seen it important that they were not safe. And so they were uprooted from their homes with about a week's notice. They were forced to leave. They lost a lot of money. They lost a lot of their property. They felt degraded, and they carried that with them in their body language, in their views. They didn't want to talk about it. There was a great shame. And when I came up with my questions, starting with my grandmother, that was really, really hard. And so, as I said, the oral history class was helpful, but I found that I really had to concentrate on everything that I brought to the table. First of all, I did a lot of research. I did as much reading as I could about the people that I was going to meet. And so I knew a little bit about them, and hopefully that would help with rapport. I also had thought about the circumstances I was going to ask them about. So I did research on that. One time I interviewed a woman, Mrs. Yamaki. Turned out she was from Fukushima, and they had silkworms. And I had no idea. So I ran, this was before internet. I went to the library and checked out 2 books on how to, silkworm processes, so I could ask intelligent questions so we could have a conversation, and that worked out really well. So I guess doing the research, so we've got enough background information on the topics and the people and the circumstances, so we're aware of what might happen. I was prepared with draft questions, and then just being present in the interview. I needed to think about my body language. I needed to think about my eye contact, and especially with Asian Americans, eye contact was not necessarily a positive. I needed to think about where we were seated. So I made sure that I was never in a seat that was higher. Sometimes I sat on a stool so that I could look up at them. I wanted them to be comfortable. I wanted them to sit in their own chairs. I wanted them to have familiar items around them. All that was so important. I also let them know that there was a lot I didn't understand. I was admitting my ignorance. So please help, because my goal is that you will help me. And then I really focused on nonverbals. I needed to think about if I didn't say anything, and sometimes silence is important. So if they're not talking, maybe they need thinking time. And often teachers do this too. We butt in with another question because we think they have no answer. In fact, some people need more time to process the answer. So silence can be golden because it gives people the opportunity. One gentleman that was exactly how he was. I would think, oh my gosh, he's fallen asleep. He'd put his head back, and then all of a sudden he would come out with these wonderful gems because it simply took him time to process that. So I think, artifacts and photos, thinking about our nonverbals. I just ask a lot of questions, and I think more now. I tend to ask more questions because they're invitational, and I try to avoid saying less because my goal is to engage. I think someone, I don't remember who, said, if we keep talking, that doesn't help you learn. But if you ask questions, you're going to get a lot more information, and it can also develop a relationship with others. And I think that's important.
Thank you for that. And I think it stands out to me the importance of kind of oral history and creating kind of a safe space for people to communicate their stories and their experiences. And I know I feel like I have some research of my own just to learn more about oral history, having grown up in like the technology generation where so much of so much of the oral history is now virtual, or is, you know, a lot of our interactions are kind of in this virtual internet space. And I think there's probably some really good tools and techniques around oral history of just, like you said, creating space and being okay with silence, which I know I've been uncomfortable with silence before, and I don't think I'm alone in that. But kind of, I think that's going to be one of my takeaways, is looking into the ways in which oral history is continuing, since it's such an ancient practice too of over many centuries. Oral history has been so important to our family stories and our cultural stories that we take along with us. And I think for me, it's something that I would like to learn more about.
Yeah. One other point, and it occurred to me that what I tried to do when I finished was always to wrap up with a summary of what we talked about, and to try to identify one or two things that I thought that they brought to the table that were really important, and I'd be specific about it. I was so surprised. Thank you so much for helping me to learn this. Next time I'd like to be able to follow up on this, but it always helps to get that specific reinforcement. This is what I learned from you. It works. It's important in the classroom. I can imagine it's important with colleagues, and it certainly was important in my oral histories as well. So.
Wonderful. And I think we're coming up on time. I don't know if others on the panel have other questions, or if we want to kind of start wrapping up, because I think there's going to be some closing thoughts from folks who are here.
So yeah, thanks again, Linda, for your time and your insight and your perspective on everything. It's really such a pleasure to listen. But now we're going to move on and hear a few words from Bryant Campbell from Business Oregon, and from our very own Veronica Marie.
Dr. Tamura, first of all, again, I'd like to just reiterate thank you and appreciation from the executive team and the staff of Business Oregon. We were very pleased to partner with Business Oregon in bringing you and your story to our staff and sharing in this adventure with Veronica and the DCBS leadership and staff. Today, as I said earlier, your story brought us a wealth of information and demonstrates not only your experience, your professional experience, your life experience, but I feel like we really got a piece of your true heart and spirit of what this is all about, and what the work of those of us like Veronica and I that are practitioners of this work recognize every day, that it's more than just an academic view of what is happening and the differences and the similarities between cultures and people, but it really is about the life experiences, and that we put a piece of ourselves into it every time that we have the opportunity to share, and you've done that with us today. And so I want to just thank you sincerely from our leadership and our staff for coming and sharing with us today. Your presentation really did demonstrate the value of the journey that communities around this country make. And we know that in Oregon, the contributions of underrepresented communities, there have been attempts to either whitewash it or to eliminate it. And for you to stand in the space and be such an eloquent representation of the AAPI community and the contributions that have happened in Oregon and continue to happen here in Oregon is a testament of the journey that we're all on in order to get to where it is that we say we want to be, both as state employees and as human beings. And so I just wanted to acknowledge, the power in your words today, and showing and demonstrating all that your cultural community has brought to Oregon and continues to bring, and even an acknowledgement of, we just saw recently that the AAPI Japanese cultural school is bringing up to the or institution that used to be owned by the Salvation Army here in Portland, and the significant contribution that's going to make to our statewide community, that we all stand in partnership and the excitement of what's going to happen in that space that has a lot of history that brought a lot of people pain. For the White Stag building and some unwed mothers, but also brought healing. And so it was nice to see that as that building transitions and the Japanese school takes that over, that's going to continue to bring healing and positive energy to our state. So thank you, and thank you to your community for allowing you to be their representative today.
Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Linda, I cannot say any more words that Brian and everybody have said that, but I want to say that, you know, after listening to you, hearing your story, your experience, you know, it made me recognize how much I don't know and I need to learn.
Yeah, I need to
and
know. Yeah.
I am very committed to knowing my communities. And it's going to be a journey for me, another journey to take. But I want to say just thank you for being here. Thank you for the staff that have been behind the scene. Nick is our technical, and Brittany. I want to say thank you for the support you're giving us now in this moment. But, you know, while listening to you talking, I want us to acknowledge what is the events that are happening in our community, to our AAPI descendant. But you know what? We need to take action. Lip service is gone. We need to start learning about the past to be able to have a better future where everyone is included in value. And the only way we can do it is by recognizing and accepting, celebrating the colors, the skins, the language, the gender, everything, all the diversity that our communities have. So we all have a responsibility in this work. It's not Brian or myself doing the work, it's all of us together. And so I will say, let's learn from, I think you say Karen and Rudy, when they say, I like you, you are different. And you know what? I want to add a little bit. Let's celebrate our similarities, because that's a place of joy about keeping the conversation with our teams, with our families, and taking it to our community. But let's not stay in this space. Let's move forward. We can do it. We can do it together. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. DCBS employees, we're going to have a crucial conversation on the 12th. Everybody is invited. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.